Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Above Board podcast. Today we welcome Tracy Weiss to the show. She's a licensed mental health counselor with over a decade of experience, but more specifically, she is also a life consultant that aims at helping people create happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. Quick funny story, I first met Tracy almost 2 years ago when she came to our office and facilitated a team building exercise based around our Enneagram types. And by sheer coincidence, we learned that day that we were also neighbors. Tracy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you. Before we dive into all of the fun the list of questions I have for you here, do you mind sharing a little bit about, so it's a two-part question, a little bit about your origin story and then the work, like maybe fast forward to present day, the work that you're currently doing with your company, Weiss Counsel, to help others.
Okay, briefly, nutshell. This is essentially a second career for me. I was a branding and promotions designer. I actually did a lot of work in ministry for that for years. And I just kept having friends being like, you seem really bored. What are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know. They're like, you should be a counselor. I was like, okay, sure. I'll investigate that. And I did. And it's around the same time I was dating my now husband. And it's actually interesting that kind of simultaneously, and me going to school to get my master's in counseling and psychology, my husband was introducing me to the Enneagram. And so kind of my journey into psychology was paired with this personality assessment, the Enneagram, and getting to know that. And I just came out of school, did private practice for several years, and then really just after doing some personal work of my own, discovered or realized that I'm just more wired in the kind of a little bit more of the coaching space. I'm a little more directive than your traditional counselor, and really just kind of pairing that with how much I call myself an Enneagram enthusiast because I don't think I'm an expert, but I love it to death and I think it's powerful. And so kind of just things just happen as things happen in life where you just kind of connect to the next thing and that connects you to the next thing. All of a sudden I was like an Enneagram workshop team building leader and I loved it. And so I do it with individuals, I do it with teams at this point. And it's, I think, the work I'm called to, if anything. It just feels right. And it's so fun. And so I do a lot of teams and I do a lot of individuals. And then I still kind of counsel on the side. But yeah.
That's really cool. And obviously, like I said, that's how we came to work with you was, so Tracy came out, did this Enneagram workshop with everyone at our company. And I guess I think that's maybe the conversation that I want to track today. And I have a series of questions about it. Because for me, well, I wrote down, I liked what you said, an Enneagram enthusiast. I like that term because I think for me, I didn't know this world just a year or two ago.
Yes.
And now I really see life a little differently. For example, I'm more mindful of, there'll be certain reactions or things I do where I'm like, oh, okay. Like I understand it a little bit better now that you've taught me what my Enneagram type is.
Yep.
And then also just working with other people, like being like relationships, interactions with people and kind of understanding them better. And so I guess let's maybe start there and just take a moment to unpack. For those that don't know, let's unpack a little bit about what the Enneagram is. And then can you maybe share what someone could hope to learn about themselves if they were to learn what their Enneagram number is?
Absolutely. The Enneagram on its base level is a personality assessment. So on its base level, it assesses you, human behavior, human motivation, and puts you into one of 9 categories. So there's 9 different personality types according to the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. But the Enneagram at its base level is not even touching the surface because it's such a dynamic tool for personal growth. It just really is. Because it not only kind of gives you like, this is the platform on which you stand on right now. This is who you are and this is how you got there. But then it also kind of gives you a launching point and a path for what you need to do with that information. So I think if someone kind of comes in at the base level and they find out, oh, my Enneagram number is a 3, which is what I am, they're going to go, oh, that's why I'm so hyper productive and I so like to win and I need to win. And there's a a self-acceptance that comes, I think, a little bit with kind of realizing, oh, well, this just makes sense. This tells me exactly who I am. And now I can feel some confidence in that versus questioning myself all the time. But then you take it a step further and then another 7 steps further, and you really realize how sometimes how you're wired isn't really working for you anymore. And
Yeah.
it gives you a little bit of a path to change that.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
I'll it does. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to get vulnerable for a minute. So for the folks listening to this, Tracy coached me personally in therapy last fall. And, I think for me, I was really struggling with burnout and just overwhelm. And so I'll identify with what you said. So Tracy, you're a type 3 Enneagram, which is known as the achiever.
Yes.
Is that right?
Correct.
You'd be disappointed in me if I didn't know the
That's
answer
a
to
true
that. Actually,
statement.
I literally have the book. Megan on our team bought us all the book, like of our Enneagram types. So I have it sitting here. So, and as an achiever, just someone that's very goal oriented, hyper productive, like you said. And I guess some of the things I've learned about myself is just I'm very susceptible to burnout
Right.
because I can go really hard for a stretch of time, and so it was so interesting to me. And I guess I have a question for you in all of this explanation, but it was interesting for me to learn about myself. Learn, okay, these are when you're doing these types of things, you're in a more healthy
Yeah.
place. Was that like healthy versus unhealthy, or maybe that's not the right word to describe it? I'll pause so you can describe that correctly. Did I do that right?
Well, pretty much. I mean, it's your when you're in stress, you're going to tend to be more have certain behaviors that are unhealthy, and then when you're in growth, you're going to have some behaviors that are more. I hesitate to use the word productive because we're threes, but more productive
Yeah.
for your personal
Yeah.
growth. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Those words are, yeah. So when you're in stress versus when you're in growth. And so what I realized was, especially when we were talking last year, I was in these places of stress. And what was really difficult for somebody like me was some of the things, Tracy, that you challenged me with were you're not going to get up at 5 a.m. and go work out.
Right.
You're not gonna you even challenged me to take my Whoop. I'm holding it up for the ones watching this
You've
on
got it
video.
back
You
on.
challenged me to Of course I do, but you challenged me to take it off, and I
Right.
took it off for a few weeks. And it was so counterintuitive to the way that I
Yeah.
am. And but it was really productive for, I guess, for my growth. Because and for me, like when I think of growth, it's like you said, that's maybe a dangerous word for a type 3 because my mind tracks to certain things as far as achievement and goals and checklists and stuff. But growth for me last fall and working with you and actually at the beginning of this year was trying to undo some of that
Yeah.
over productive, just overdrive mentality that I had. And I thought it was really useful. And so I guess one of my so I'm sharing that conversation, a series of conversations we had. But it, does your style of coaching and therapy with people, is it like mine with you is very informed through the Enneagram?
Yeah.
Is that your style? I mean, do you require people to take an Enneagram test, or just give me a feel for, I know this is like a weird question,
No.
but like how different was our conversations versus ones that you're having with other people that you're working with?
Well, it's interesting because my therapy is different than life consultation. I mean, it's in
Okay.
my book, it really is because, and there's certain clients that I would not have as life consultation. They need to go do therapy
Yeah.
first, if that makes sense.
I would say the lines were blurred for me, but
And
okay. Well,
sometimes they are because
I'll take.
any
Yeah.
personal growth work is going to open kind of a can of worms. I mean, it is. You're going to
Right.
get messy. Things are going to get messy. It should. That means it's working, doing what it's supposed to be doing. But I
Mhm.
think a lot of times in therapy, I'm using the Enneagram is like kind of like in my library, in my head. And I'm filtering a lot of things through that because really, ultimately, the Enneagram is about a little bit of inborn temperament, like kind of some things you're just born with, but it's a lot about learned behavior. And learned behavior is usually kind of set up in those younger years, like 0 to 10. And so a lot of what comes up in therapy and in coaching and in consultation and even in team building exercises is stuff that's really personal and
Mhm.
is a lot of childhood stuff, a lot of this kind of like stuff there people aren't even aware of, because a lot of times it happens before they even have a memory that their behaviors are being set up. And so all of that to say, as in therapy and in life consultation, I'm super casual, but I'm really informed from this like psychological side of things. And I think the Enneagram is just one of the most psychologically sound assessments and tools out there, because it really does take into account kind of your early upbringing, so attachment and trauma and those kind of things. So they're going to always play into any personal growth work. So whether that's more in the coaching space or more in the therapy space. So
Sure.
that makes
Sure.
sense.
And I guess it definitely does. I think looking inward, it's valuable for me. I'm using myself again as the example, but it
Yeah.
was valuable for me to understand my Enneagram type. But then externally, it was really helpful for, let's say, I'll use Canterpath as an example in a moment, but even just like in my own relationship with my spouse. So I had, after we did all of this as a team when we first met, I had Jackie. I said, I really want you to take the Enneagram test too. And then I found out that she was a type 9, which is known as the peacemaker.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really good awareness, because you obviously like to think you know your spouse, right? But then when you learn these things, or you get to have these conversations that the Enneagram test sort of forces you to be reflective on,
Absolutely.
it became really helpful in the course of our relationship to understand how to handle
Yeah.
circumstances. My wife is, again, the type 9 is known as the peacemaker. So she's a people pleaser by nature, and she really just wants to keep things copacetic
Mhm.
in dynamic relational dynamics. And so when I see that from her, and I think there's areas of growth for a type 9 that look different than a type 3,
Yeah.
and areas of stress for a type 9 that look different than a type 3. And so learning that, so I have awareness to see, oh, okay, maybe she's in a place of stress right
Yep.
now. For me, that was so helpful to understand. Can you speak to that a little
Oh
bit?
yeah.
So then I guess like step one's learning yourself, and then step two is kind of having a broader awareness of your relationships around you.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that you did that. You had her take the assessment, because what the awareness breeds is compassion. I mean, and when you have compassion, connection and communication become so much easier and so much more instinctual. And because the reality of the Enneagram and knowing the different types is that you start to understand that people literally see through a different lens. They'll see the exact same circumstance through a different lens. And when you can sit there and go, okay, I don't get it, but I can understand that you are seeing the situation differently. That compassion goes miles towards being able to connect with them or to help them or to see where they might need something that you wouldn't need. But because you're different, you're capable of stepping in and maybe giving them the help that they need or pointing out the thing that they don't see. And so, any relationship, romantic, friendship, parent to child. I mean, the Enneagram has been so revolutionary for me and how I interact with my kids. But then also, again, teams. I mean, especially remote, because it's so easy to be distant remotely, right? And there's so many more teams that are online in this day and age that like they don't. It's easy to go, oh, I'm distracted by my cat walking over the keyboard versus having the hard conversation. And if you know that this is going to be a hard conversation for somebody because you know what their Enneagram number is, you might be able to push in. Nope, don't get distracted. I love your cat.
Yeah.
Let's have the conversation. Does that make sense?
That's really I'm glad that you brought that up, because again, that's our origin story of getting to know you, Tracy. Is so about 2 years ago, not quite 2 years ago, but close to, you came to our office, and we had this half a day workshop.
Yeah.
And it was really what was so okay. So I don't know if I don't know if this is what you do with every team, or company that you do this with, but it was really fun because so for the folks listening, we answered the questions, we did the Enneagram test, but we didn't know what our results
Yeah.
were. And Tracy comes in that morning, And I think everyone initially is a little bit not on edge, but okay, so I'll speak for me. There was this feeling of she knows my Enneagram number, and you're maybe feeling a little bit prejudged before we even met you,
Fair,
you know?
fair.
And that's certainly not the case. Like Tracy doesn't do that, but those are some internal dialogues that I had. And what was so funny was at the very end, if I fast forward at the very end, I said, I made a comment to you, Tracy, and because we were neighbors and then we discovered this after we finally met at the office, you were like, "Yeah, I've seen you in the neighborhood before. Like, I knew you were a type 3 before
That's right.
you didn't need to take the test for me to know that you were a type 3 Enneagram just based on characteristics and like behaviors, I guess, that I was doing in the
Yep.
neighborhood." But what I enjoyed was so Tracy kind of educated us on 1 through 9. So we went through type 1, type 2, type 3, and so on, and 1 through 9. What was so interesting because you're this vulnerable moment, like you don't know your number,
Yeah.
right? And so you're trying to self-identify. So Tracy's going through the type 1, and I'm thinking, oh, you know what? Maybe that's me. Like maybe I'm a type. And then she's going through the type 2, which is the helper.
Yep.
I thought maybe that's me. Like I identify
With some
with
of that. Yeah.
some of these attributes. And then you got to type 3 and I was like, "Oh, no, that's definitely me." And
Mhm.
what really hit me in the feels was I hate that I skew this way sometimes, but like the negative
Of course. Yeah.
or the stressful because that's what I identified with the
Yeah.
most. Like type 1, type 2, I'm like, "Oh yeah, some of those positive things." Like, yeah, I get that. That feels like me. And then type 3, it was all of the positive attributes and then some of the, things we do when we're in stress
Yeah.
and just identifying with this idea, for me it's my desires to feel valuable.
Yeah.
My fear is being worthless. And you used a couple examples that was like really hit home for me,
Mhm.
Tracy. And then for the folks listening, we did this again a year later. So just a few months ago here in the middle of 2024. So we've done this twice now.
Yep.
And in each scenario, I've learned from Tracy different things. One of those was I like if things aren't going my way and I'm in a place of stress, the term that I think you used was like a type 3 will take their ball and go home.
Yep.
And that's so me because like in a positive growth mindset, I like to think I'm this team player.
Mhm.
Like I played team sports growing up. I love the dynamics of a team winning and collaborating, not just like a person individually
Yeah.
winning. But when I'm in a place of stress, man, I take my ball and go home. And for me, that looks like I got it. Don't worry about it. No, I'm fine.
Uh-huh.
I'm fine. I got it. I'll do it. I'll do it. And now what was been I think helpful, my team knowing this about me, Haley, for example, there was a couple weeks ago I said that. I was like, don't worry about it, I got it. And she kind of stopped me and she said, no,
Mm.
I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna do
I love
this.
it.
And I looked at her and I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
And because she just was able I think you've helped Tracy fast track that for us as a
Mm.
team. So I want to speak to that and give you some kudos
I
because
appreciate it.
I obviously I know you work individually and in team based settings. I think that was great. Can you talk a little bit about what what's an ideal for you? Like not an ideal client maybe, but like when you do these team enneagram sessions, like how many is too many?
Yeah.
What is what do you find facilitates good conversation for the folks listening to this thinking about maybe we should do a
Yeah.
team building exercise around
No, I
this?
love that question. I I think 8 is the happy place, 6 to 8, honestly, because there's a level of vulnerability that can be achieved in that smaller group. 10, I've done 10 and then I've partnered with somebody and done about 20. Did not love that because it you don't get the chance to get into the nuance reality of essentially just people. I mean,
Mhm.
because people aren't formulaic, but there is kind of there's some similarities, right? And then especially within obviously the Enneagram types, but in terms of how they interact. And that's really key for teams relationships, right? So the for me to be able to sit back and go, "Oh, I'm seeing how this 8 and this 2 interact." They have no awareness of the fact that because of who they are, they're going to always have a codependent relationship if they're not aware of things, right?
Mhm.
And I can see that easier and speak to it in a smaller group. I like giving the information up front and then kind of allowing conversation to happen. And like I said, I'm kind of directive, so I tend to say, what's that about? Or tell me more. I think it's the team building really happens after the information has been given and everyone's reflective. And then it's always, always fun after the information has been given. It's just fun because everyone's, oh, that's why you do that thing that you do. And that's why I can't stop doing this. And it's just really bonding after the information's been given. And then the conversation just kind of goes from there and vulnerability happens. And vulnerability always breeds connection again. So I don't even know if that answered your question, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Well, I wrote down this. I mean, there's like keywords that I just like to take notes when I'm doing conversations like
Yeah.
this for the podcast. And I wrote down bonding. I also wrote down something you said a moment ago or a few minutes or prior, which is awareness creates compassion.
Yes.
And I just believe that I'll use Canterpath as an example. So there's 7 of us, and having this kind of innate understanding of, I'll use Matt as an example. He's a challenger. He's a type 8.
Yeah.
Having this innate understanding of him and what makes him tick. And it's fun. Actually, he's a great example because I've known Matt for 15 years. And so, at the surface level, you'd be like, oh gosh, I mean, I know him very well. He's my business partner. He's sort of like he's a good friend. He's like a sibling
Yeah.
almost. Like we have that kind of relational dynamic, which you've witnessed
Yeah.
firsthand. And yet learning about his Enneagram type was still very helpful for me to navigate conversation with him, to recognize when he's in a point of stress,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I'm not going to lean in here and keep doubling down on something that we got to figure out when he's
Right.
in a point of stress. We're just going to pause and we're going to come back to that conversation later.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's created a ton of interpersonal awareness. I have a question that this has been coming up for me a lot lately, and I don't know if other people feel the same way when it comes to the Enneagram, but is there an overlay, or where's the connection point between Enneagram types and one's love language?
Mm. Uh,
Because I find myself asking or like talking about love language a lot
yeah.
as it relates to this.
No, I think I find that threes really words of affirmation are go miles. Twos tend to think words of affirmation go miles, but really it's acts of service that can make a big impact on twos. They're never going to ask for it, but when you step in and help, it's like, what? There's certain numbers that just tend to have a preference or leaning. I'm trying to think of who. Sevens, it's actually interesting. Sevens and eights, physical touch can be really, really valuable because they are in that. And I'd say eights actually, sevens and eights for different reasons because okay, I'm going to stop myself because like I said, I could go down rabbit holes with the Enneagram and this would be getting into triads and
Yeah, I was gonna say I
yeah,
don't know if I want
yeah.
to have physical touch between Matt and I as an 8 and a 3.
Right?
So
You just got to give them hugs, lots and lots of hugs. But it's like the 8 is in this gut triad and they just tend to be they use their body a lot. You'll meet an 8 and they just tend to like own the room when they walk in. Their personality is larger than life a lot of times. And to that end, they tend to respond passionately in wanting or not wanting physical touch. So it's like for the guys, the aggressive handshake could be really off-putting for them. But the cuddle with their wife is really, really connecting for them because they're already in this kind of very body-driven and affected space. Sevens are they're in the head space, they're in the thinking triad, but they just love anything good and lots of it. If they were to have quote unquote a sin, it's going to be gluttony. So they're going to want all the good all the time. So physical touch can be really, really impactful or needed or wanted for sevens. But there is some compatibility. Absolutely. There's also some,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I wanted to ask because on that thread that you were talking about, I remember learning this last time with you when you came out to the team, and you talked about, I guess those triads is the word you use, but if I'm saying this right, some people feel with their head, some people feel with their heart, and some with their gut,
Yep. First.
right?
It's kind of like their first instinct.
Their first instinct.
Mhm.
And when you said that, I think Megan on our team's first reaction was, yeah, and that's like a phrase I use all the time is go with your gut,
Yeah.
or what does your gut say? And for her, I think as a peacemaker, that's kind of where she lends. But for me, I think a type 3 falls into the heart
Yeah. Yep.
feeling and totally. That's where I feel it.
Yep.
That's where my initial instincts, the feelings come up for me is there. So it's really even that was weird, like almost kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like I and so but hearing you say that and then seeing the rest of the room resonate with that
Yeah.
and self-identifying back to their Enneagram type and going, yeah, no, that's how I feel. That's just it's super powerful, I think.
It's because it is like revolutionary, that kind of self-awareness. I mean, it just is. Like
Yeah.
when you're able to go, oh, and I mean, and again, back to that compassion piece with others, be like, okay, and they're not going to be able to enter into this space the same way I am. This project, this trauma, this normal day-to-day life experience. They're not coming at it from the same angle as I am. And okay, so I can't have the same expectations of them as I have for myself. And that's really, really, really life changing when it comes down to it, is being able to, the more you know, the more you can do different, honestly. And
Mhm.
I think we forget that like personal growth is a journey. It's not a destination. We, the threes in the room, forget that. And that journey is kind of just revelatory over and over and over again. Uh, but that also breeds connection and compassion if we could see it in others as well. So,
So that's such an accurate statement, and obviously, as you're saying that, I mean, I'm receiving that a certain type of way because I know in my sessions with you, and again, I'll share this, but as a type 3, everything is achievement oriented. So when we talk about goals, and I'm like, yeah, Tracy, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do therapy so good. Like
no,
I'm
I
gonna
need you to suck at
crush.
it. That's
Yeah,
great.
like I'm gonna crush this personal development. And then, then part of the homeworks that Tracy would give me when we'd meet looked like things that I really stumbled
Yeah.
on. For example, okay, well, you're gonna do some meditation and you're gonna do like instead of weight training or instead of here's a good example for me. Going on a run is I think a lot of people listening to this identify with it. Like you go on a run, it just clears your
Yeah.
brain. Gets just clears. Instead of going on a run, you're gonna replace that activity with sleeping in
Hmm.
and waking up and doing meditation. And I was like, "Oh, no, I don't wanna do that. I don't
Yeah.
wanna do that.
Hmm.
Can we do other things that I can check off the list and achieve?" But it really is it's really been fun exploring my own self-awareness and then having you kinda help me guide that.
Yeah.
And, just sometimes really being able to talk to somebody about this stuff is next level because then I take my conversations with you, Tracy, and then bring that to Jackie, and then her and I are talking through things,
Yeah.
and it's giving her awareness about me, it's giving me awareness about our relationship, and so it's been great. I've just shifting gears a little
Yeah.
bit. Do you meet with so in the way that you meet with teams? Do you meet with or individuals? Do you meet with couples as well? Because I would imagine this is super useful for
Yeah.
couples to
On the
understand each other.
Enneagram side of things, I'm not a couples therapist. I know lots of people who
Yeah.
are better at that than I am, but I think when you're able to, yeah, it's essentially just Enneagram exploration. You guys take the tests. I'm going to keep the information. We're going to sit down, have conversations about it. And
Hmm.
it is often kind of like the launching point for, I mean, I would say 50% of the couples I've worked with on Enneagram end up in couples therapy, but for good reasons, because they're like, oh, wow, we have like work we can do here. Like now we have awareness of where our problem areas are. And
Yeah.
also where we can lean into because we're actually really, really strong and compatible in these areas. And so, yeah, uh, it's conversation that leads to more and more connection, and then they crave it. You just crave more connection when you have quality connection. And there's a difference between connection and quality connection, communication and quality communication. And you get that quality when you have more awareness of yourself and others. So,
Yeah, it's really good. I guess I wrote down, I literally just wrote down the words "just start" because
mhm.
I think for me, I was asking that question, trying to understand, people that are seeking just some personal growth and like progress and learning about themselves or awareness within their relationships. There's probably 17 different ways you could begin this. You
Mhm.
could do couples therapy, you could take an Enneagram test, you could do whatever, but like whatever you're feeling called to do, just start to do something.
Absolutely.
Because I think for me, meeting you what came at a really great time because we did that team session, and then I kind of pulled you aside and I was like, hey, I'm feeling burned out, can we talk
Yeah.
about that? And then we had sessions together, and it's this conversation's so personal to me because obviously I invited you on the podcast, Tracy, but there's so much that I didn't know about myself just a year ago that I've learned. And because this is so type 3 of me, but I have to track stuff. I use this band on my wrist to track my HRV,
Yeah.
my heart rate variability. And you're gonna laugh so hard. At the beginning of the year,
I'm already
we
laughing.
shared as a team. We shared as a team what our goals were personally for the year.
Okay.
And mine was a mouthful, and everyone just was like, "Of course, of course, that's your goal." It was to find balance between my sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And they're like, what does that
Oh,
even
I
mean?
love
And
it.
for me, how I track that is my heart rate variability.
Yep.
And then a lot of the stuff I did with you, I watched that improve.
Yep.
So it was interesting because it's not like I woke up renewed one day or I
No.
felt better one day, but just a slow progressive increase in my HRV.
Yep.
It's, and just doing this with you, it was just so personal to me to have that level of self-awareness. And I think for me, my story was when you came to do our team event, you just were able to really get to understand everyone well
Mm.
quickly. Like I don't it's a skill that, and I'm kind of bragging on you here for a moment, but it's like a skill that you've developed that I don't think many people have, but you just had this innate ability to kind of like ask the right question and then move the conversation along to help create awareness. And you just had this understanding of me. And I think the Enneagram helped you
Oh,
even to
absolutely.
understand
Yeah.
everyone on the team. Like it probably tailors your conversation. And so again, this conversation is super personal to me. And I can't say enough, I can't give you enough kudos. So,
Well,
just really appreciate the work that you do for helping people. And any as we're wrapping up today, I have a couple final
yeah.
questions for you. So let's say, again, I wrote down just start for those listening, just start that discovery journey or awareness
Mhm.
journey. That might look like taking the Enneagram test. Like, how do you even do that?
Yeah.
What is that? Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
There's several assessments out there, Enneagram assessments. There's several free ones. Like I said, the Enneagram has gotten trendier and trendier, and therefore there's a
Mhm.
lot of people making money off of it. And there's a lot of people who, they created sites around it. And I don't think any of those are problematic. Again, it's a just start scenario. But there are a couple out there that are just really solid. I always use the Enneagram Institute. I think it's enneagraminstitute.com. And their tests are $20 each, and they're just solid. I mean, I've routinely, I'd say it's been maybe 10% where it didn't nail the person's type once I've been in personal
Mhm.
chats with them. Like, oh, you know why? You probably skewed this way. Here's why. But that one, and then there's Beth McCord, which is the book that Megan got you. She has, I think it's yourenneagramcoach.com. Her stuff is really solid, her assessment. And there's another couple that are more pricey for more business oriented or more creative oriented. But yeah, Google good Enneagram
Yeah.
assessment. But I do think the Enneagram Institute has probably the best one out there.
Yeah. Cool. I can't overstate it. I mean, this is something I'm going to share again for everyone listening to know, but when we're looking at bringing somebody on new to the team, we now have Tracy meet with that person. It's almost like part of the interview process
Love it.
for us at Canterpath is not only to take the Enneagram test, but then have a session with Tracy. And so anyway, Tracy, we're so grateful for you. I selfishly, this turned into like a free therapy session for me because I get to
Whatever.
talk
I
about
love it.
this stuff. But I think listeners can certainly benefit from this. And this is going to sound like I'm overstating it, but I promise you it's not. I think understanding your Enneagram really, I mean, for me anyway, it's truly changed my view on life around me and my interactions with others. So really just appreciative for you joining. As a final question, where can people find and follow you, Tracy?
Oh, love it. I wouldn't say that I'm awesome at social media because I got little people and
Yes, you are.
oh gosh. Oh, thank you. I'm a 3 and I appreciate those words. But Weiss Counsel at Weiss Counsel, WEISS Counsel. That is Instagram and Facebook, and then weisscounsel.com is my website. But like I said, I'm really casual, so I like having conversations, and I'm so pro Enneagram because it is what you said. It is life changing, and it's so dynamic. I mean, you can go in one level or you can go 20 levels deep, and you're going to find a difference in your life regardless. So
Yeah, I love that. You have a guide on your website. Can people book with you on your
yes,
website too? How does
yes,
that
there's I think several buttons that take you directly to a consultation.
like a booking?
Yeah. And most for teams, most of my workshops are like 3 hours long. I have some packages, but then, there's always,
Nice.
it's, I love working with people with the Enneagram. So it's the fastest change I think you can invest in, honestly, is that awareness. So
Yeah, well, allow me to be, the living, breathing testament on this conversation of that.
cool.
Like it's I've experienced it, but like you said, there's no set end destination
Mm-mm.
as much as somebody like me wants that to be the case. Like
Yes.
I can, I want to be able to say I have total self-awareness and I know how to, I know when I'm lucky
Uh-huh.
and I know when I'm being healthy. That's not reality. It's something that you keep working on. It's like
Yeah. Life happens.
it's like working out. It's like strength training.
Yep.
Like you could be on a good roll for a while and then you stop for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna take some time to get back to it.
Yep. Or
So,
you get older
just
and
a
muscles harder to come by, and it's the same thing kind of with, training your brain and experiencing new. So
so true, so true. Well, thank you again, Tracy, for hanging with us today.
wonderful.
And as always, thank you, the listeners, for hanging with us on the Above Board podcast. We love these conversations and we love our listeners. If you prefer to watch this conversation instead of just listening to it, head over to our YouTube channel and you can subscribe to our podcast. You can find us at Canterpath or search the Above Board podcast on YouTube. Thank you all for listening to our show today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Yeah.